Today, I'm reheating a brisket.
Hey yo, this is Dash.
Hey yo, this is Dash, and just like I said, I'm going to be reheating a brisket today. This has been one of the most questions I get, or question I get pretty regularly. So I'm going to walk you guys through the process, and again, this is super technical, so make sure you get your notepads, like a pen, maybe a pencil, because you might have to erase because you might make a mistake, but get ready. The first thing I've done is I've gone ahead and I have my brisket I cooked overnight. When it came out, I chilled it, and what I ended up doing was I warmed it up in the oven for just a few minutes to get all of the juices and au jus to liquefy, and I poured them into this fat separator. This fat separator, there is a link down in the description for it. It is one of my favorite barbecue tools that you can find down in the description. But you take the juices and the au jus, the fat and the juices that come off of the brisket once you warm it up, and you put it into here. You let it settle for a few moments, and you can see where this is colder and this is the warmer fat, and obviously that's the au jus down at the bottom. This is what we're going to take and provide to the customer. All right, so at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my cutting board out. You guys have seen me cut up a brisket, but for sake of content, let's watch it again. Okay, so I have my brisket, and I'm gonna pull this brisket and put it over on the cutting board. Now, this brisket I have is only, when I started out, this was like a 12.5 pound brisket. So it's cooked down. I told you guys that rule of thumb is usually it's about half. The catering event I have today, they need 5 pounds of brisket, so this will fit the bill. So as you can see, this is the whole brisket, and it is not a very big brisket. Again, I only needed 5 pounds. I didn't want a whole bunch of waste, so I did not actually, I only cooked what I needed. So at this point, again, I have the whole brisket. I'm going to take my knives, and this is the serrated knife. You can see the serrations, and I have a straight blade knife also, okay? I talked about the knives in another video. I'm gonna try to insert a card where you can see that video. But I'm gonna go ahead and get this sliced up. This is how I do my briskets. This is not a hard and fast rule. This is not the only way to get it done. This is how I do them for my customers, my paying customers, not just for me. If I were doing it for myself, I probably would leave a little bit more fat on this brisket, but because I am doing this for a customer, I'm going to trim it a little more aggressively than you might like. Not saying it's the wrong way, not saying it's the only way. This is how I get it done for my paying customers. I'm saying that now because I've had a lot of people come at me and tell me how wrong I am and all these other, things, and it's not worth it. If you don't agree, then you do it how you do it. But I'm trying to tell you, this is how I do it for my paying customers. All right, that being said, let's get back to it. Okay, so the first step is we're going to separate the point from the flat, and the easiest way for me to do it, it's gonna take experience, but once you trim the brisket well enough before cooking, there's a big line of fat that comes on the underside of the brisket. So again, this is the fat cap, this is the top. On the underside, there's a big hunk of fat. If you cut that big hunk of fat out, you'll be able to see where the separation between the point at the bottom, the flat at the bottom, and the point at the top are. So I can take my knife and go straight in through here, out the other side, and just follow that bit of fat where the two muscles come together, up. And then I'm gonna take my knife and go back in the opposite direction and go down, and I'm gonna separate the point from the flat. Now, there's a little bit of a point here, but this in here is just fat that we can actually get rid of some of this. And I know not everybody agrees with me, but we're just gonna take some of that out. Then the next thing I'm going to do is flip this over and switch knives. The grain of this muscle is running this way. I know you might not be able to see, but it's running this way. So I'm going to make my cuts perpendicular to the grain. Okay, so I told you guys that this order was for 5 pounds of brisket. So at this point, what I'm going to do, zero out my scale, put my container on, and we're going to measure 2.5 pounds of brisket to go into this container. Alright, so we have 2 pounds, 8 ounces, a little over. That's fine. So we'll stick this off to the side. And now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to slice the brisket up smaller so that people can have pretty much bite-sized pieces. All right, so here we have, and this is, it'll look a little better once it comes out of the oven, once it's warmed up. So here we have the flat. I'm gonna set this off to the side and get it covered in a second. Okay, so now I have the point, and the point is, this is the fattier bit of it. And again, when trimming the point, you'll be able to feel, and it's one of those things I can't explain it in words, but you'll be able to feel where you can cut across and square it up and not get very much of the actual meat from the point. Now, this piece I actually saved for myself, so that's going back in the pan. Now, when you cut the point, the grain of the point runs this way. So what happens is, in order to make these bite-sized pieces, you cut with the grain for your first cut. Okay? Then I go through, and this is where you can see a lot of the fat that comes from in between the two muscles, and you see I just cut right just the fat off. And I will trim the fat from the underside of the point. Here again, this you can see right in here, just like that. If I were to send that with this event today, or for this event today, it wouldn't like it. So I'll come in here again, and this is how I trim for my events. I'm just cutting a lot of that fat out so they're only getting the meat, and not as much fat on the underside. On the top side, they're fine with it because there's flavor in it, because that's where it's seasoned. So now that I've gone ahead and trimmed that fat from the point, in order to cut against the grain, you take your, actually it's this way, you take your brisket and you turn it sideways and come across and cut thin slices. When I get to the tip of the point, the far end of the point, I flip the point up on the flat side that I made the cut in the beginning. This won't sit properly if you don't do that. I've tried cutting it upside down, which is okay, but then I have to flip it right side back now. So flip it on the flat cut side that you have already, and then take your time. There you have it. Now this piece here, it is nothing but fat, so I'm going to chuck that into the fat pile, and I'm going to stick this into the pan. I'm going to spread it out just a little bit, and there is the moist brisket in the pan. Thank you to everybody who told me about the wet paper towel trick. I have been using it when I remember. Zero out my scale, and the scale is at exactly 2.5 pounds. So we are good. Because of the type of event that this is, I definitely cut off a lot more fat than some of you guys would probably. Again, this is for my customers up here. Do not want this. If you guys have customers that are okay with getting the fat, then kudos to you guys, but not my customers up here. Again, I'm in Baltimore. Brisket is not nearly as common as it is in some of the places where you guys are, and the fat from the brisket is not nearly accepted as well as it might be in your particular area. So at this point, I'm going to cover each of the pans and then get them into the oven. All right. Okay, so at this point, I'm actually a little ahead of schedule. So I normally put my food in the oven at about 300 degrees until it's warm. you'll be able to smell it, and this is one of those things where you're gonna have to go by your judgment on how warm you want to have your brisket. If you know, or whatever it is you're warming back up. My rule of thumb is usually between about a half an hour, 45 minutes for something that's room temperature, and maybe about 45 minutes to an hour for something that's coming directly out of the refrigerator. Because this has a little bit of a chill on it, and I have a good hour, I'm actually going to turn the heat down to 250, and I'm gonna let it go for, it is 7:42. I need to leave my house in an hour. So I'm gonna let this go for 45 minutes and we can pretty much go from there. All right, so it's 8:39. I wanna get out of here by 8:45. So let's take the brisket out of the oven. And, there's one. There's two. All right, let me get these unwrapped. All right, so I want to show you guys, and pans are definitely warm. And there is the moist, and you can see it's not dried out. There's plenty more moisture that came out of the brisket once it was warmed up. And I want to take a piece, but I'm not going to take a piece. I'm just going to cover this back up. Put the foil back on it, and I'm gonna label this one. This is the moist. Put that off to the side, and we'll get the lean. Same thing, you can see the moisture coming off of it. There's more moisture that's formed. You can see the steam coming out of there. And this isn't super duper, you know, baked crazy. Again, people ask me all the time, how do you warm it back up? You warm it back up just like you were cooking it. And one last thing, this is the au jus has fully settled. And again, I'm gonna take this au jus with me, put it in this container, and the fat separator does its job, and we'll get all of those last drippings out until we just don't want any fat coming out. This is the au jus for the brisket. What I will do, and I pop the top just so it. So what I'll do with this, the au jus, is I'm gonna provide it to the customer, tell them to warm it up in the microwave for about 15-20 seconds, just so it's nice and warm, and then pour half of it over the lean brisket and then half of it over the moist brisket. Perfect. So hopefully this answers your questions. If you have any more questions about this particular subject, please leave them down below.